Welcome to the Patriotic Pulpit. I am Bill Lockwood. We're looking at Jude verse 3 for just a moment, in which we're commanded that we are to contend earnestly for the faith that has one time for all time been delivered to the saints. Notice the faith, that is the system, the gospel system. For example, in Acts chapter 6 and verse 7, there were a number of priests who were obedient to the faith, that is the gospel system. Paul preached the faith of which he once made havoc, Galatians chapter 1, verse 23. The faith refers to the gospel system, the entire gospel, and Jude tells us that this faith, the faith, was one time for all time, that's the wording, once for all, delivered to the saints. That cuts out any idea that the faith, that is a gospel system, the doctrinal system, is revealed slowly over generations, as is posited by the Roman Catholic Church. But today specifically, I want to review the Roman Catholic Church's theory that it is infallible and show you that the infallible guide has made mistakes. Now, we've looked at several things in the past regarding the so-called infallibility of the Roman Catholic Church and the infallibility of the Pope, so-called. But today we want to look at one of the grand blunders in history of the Roman Church, and that refers to Galileo Galilei and his view of the universe, knowing that the sun was center of the solar system, the heliocentric concept of the universe. So Galileo in the 17th century learned that the sun, not the earth, was the center of our solar system. And furthermore, that the earth was in rapid motion. But this was held universally by the Roman Catholic Church as heresy. Now, many people will say, well, everybody believed that at that time. That's true. But here you have the Roman Church claiming to be inspired, or that it has an organ of inspiration within it, claiming that God is guiding it to infallible decisions. And the Roman Catholic Church also held not the heliocentric view of the universe, but that the earth was the center. And not only so, but they believed the scriptures taught it. We have learned so much better than they, and even Galileo knew better than the church did. But let's notice how the Roman Catholic Church handled Galileo when he began teaching this. Now, this is an interesting story. We won't have time to get into all of it. But summarizing, Galileo was severely treated by the Roman Church. He held what was called the Copernican theory, that is, the heliocentric view of the universe. Now, Galileo already had a high station in the scientific world, but he was called to account in 1609 and then later in 1633 for teaching the Copernican theory. Galileo had been looking through his telescope, making observations, scientific frame of mind, and widely respected, universally acclaimed scientist, and he had that high station in the world. So he expressed himself about the sun being the center of the solar system in a letter that was written in 1613, that he believed the Bible and the Copernican theory. Now remember, the Roman Church believed that the Bible taught that the earth was the center of the solar system. But Galileo is saying, no, I believe not only that the sun is the center of the solar system, but that the Bible also teaches it. He did not disregard the Bible. He said, the Bible, I believe the sun is the center, and I believe both of them teach the same thing. Now, if anything, the Roman Church, they may not be scientists, they may not have been scientifically advanced in that day, but they claimed to be infallible on their interpretation of Scripture, and they came to blows with Galileo because they believed the Scriptures taught the heliocentric, or rather the earth being the center of the solar system. Now, Galileo had seen in his telescope, for example, the moons of Jupiter, and he realized that the earth had a moon and everything was in motion. So he began to float these theories, and he taught that in a letter that I mentioned in 1613. Well, it was a private letter, but the Roman Catholic Church got hold of that letter, and it went to the Holy Office at Rome. The Dominicans at Florence got that letter initially, and then Cardinal Bellarmine said if Galileo spoke only as a mathematician, If you speak only as a mathematician, you'll have no further trouble. You teach it as mathematical fiction. But the theologians believed that the Bible taught that the earth did not move. Galileo simply wanted toleration for his own belief, but this was something the Roman Church does not do, give tolerance. Finally, the Roman Church's Inquisition received the letter. Now, at first, they did not want to deal harshly with him. He was a popular philosopher. He had wide acclaim as a scientist, as we've already noted. Cardinal Bellarmine summoned him and admonished him in the name of the Pope and the Holy Office. Now, I want you to note that. Bellarmine admonished him in the name of the Pope and the Holy Office under pain of imprisonment that he must give up the opinion that the sun was the center of the universe and that the earth moves. Well, it was not enough that Galileo should be personally warned. On March 5th, 1616, the Congregation of the Index, that is a committee that was appointed by the Pope for the prevention of circulation of dangerous books, they published a decree. So here we have the Congregation of the Index publishing a decree, and they forbade Galileo's works. They said it was repugnant to Holy Scripture, to its true and Catholic interpretation. Now, if any church should have the true interpretation of Scripture by claiming that it itself is inspired, that should be the Roman Church, because that's the claim they make. But we're pointing out that that is a false claim. They do not have any such thing at all. But they claimed that they had the true interpretation of Scripture, that Galileo had violated it. The Index continued this war against the heliocentric theory. It had been continuing this war for 2 centuries. In 1704, for example, the Index contains the prohibition. This is after Galileo's time. It teaches in the Index, it said, all books, quote, that teach the mobility of the earth and the immobility of the sun are prohibited. That's 1704. The pontiffs pronounced against the motion of the earth. They were despotic. They showed that they are just nothing more than secular despotic kings. Here's something else interesting. As far as 1828, the Index, that is, of prohibition books and prohibited writings, still contain the names of Galileo, Copernicus, and Foscarini. It was not until later, under Gregory XVI, the predecessor of Pius IX, that would be in the middle of the 19th century, that the Index dropped the names. No confession of error was made, but the names are silently withdrawn. Now just stop and think about that for a moment. The Roman Church, as the world knows, was absolutely wrong about their condemnation of Galileo and about their interpretation of Scripture saying that the earth was the center of the solar system. That is the basis upon which they attacked Galileo. And finally, it was in 1828, Galileo's name was still on the Index. They never confessed, after they withdrew his name, they never confessed their error. Because after all, if you're going to be so pompous as to say that we have infallibility in the Roman Church, how can you say we were in error? So they didn't say that, even though they withdrew his name from the Index of prohibited things to read. So back to Galileo's story. Galileo published a tract, and he did it under the form of a dialogue. Now remember, he had been warned by Cardinal Bellarmine, just keep it as a mathematician's philosophy, your own private mathematical philosophies, and everything is going to be fine. Well, Galileo was not satisfied with that, so he published a tract, and he did it in the form of a dialogue in which he had 2 persons talking to one another, and he once again talked about the heliocentric, the Copernican theory of the universe. So the Pope was Urban number 8. He ordered him to come before the Inquisition at Florence. Now the Inquisition, I remind you, had burned people for teaching heresy, or what they considered to be heresy. And matter of fact, what we're going to say today, and what we've already said, is considered by the Roman Church to be heresy. But in those days, they had the secular power in Europe, and they were able to, by the Inquisition, punish people burning them because of the heresy. I want to stop right here. How can anyone align themselves with the Roman Church, the Roman Catholic Church, that being the case, that being the history of it? I'm absolutely stunned that people still have somehow an allegiance to the Roman Church. But be that as it may, he called him to the Inquisition. That was the Pope, Urban number 8. Now, Galileo was 70 years old at the time, and he was sick. And he could not come, so the Pope demanded, however, that he come. So they sent, that is, the Holy See, sent their own doctors to Galileo to see if he was actually telling the truth, and told him if he didn't come, he would be punished. If you don't show up before the trial of the Inquisition, you're going to be punished. Let me just ask you, does that sound like the apostles of the New Testament? Paul saying, when I am weak, I am strong in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. Does that sound like Paul? Does that sound like Peter in the New Testament, who says he was simply a fellow elder in 1 Peter chapter 5? You know what? We have gotten so far away from the New Testament model in this history that is absolutely astonishing. So finally, Galileo did come, and the trial is well known. The Copernican theory was said to be heresy. Not only so, but it was a heresy to hold an opinion as probable. That's what Galileo had said in his tract. This is the heliocentric view is probable. So the Inquisition said, not only is it heresy to hold this opinion that the sun is the center of the solar system, but if you hold the opinion that it is probable, that is heresy also. The Pope personally, by the way, sat in on some of the proceedings. The Pope was there, the infallible guide, right there. The inquisitors were under the Pope's authority. So the Pope was there, the inquisitors under his authority. The Inquisition obliged Galileo to profess a belief we now know to be false. And that is that he was wrong, that the earth is the center of the solar system. How can they claim infallibility? Furthermore, they condemn that doctrine, the heliocentric view, as contrary to Scripture. So don't anybody say, well, they were not scientists, they didn't know. That's true, they were not scientists. Galileo was, but they actually put him on the hot seat literally because he taught the truth regarding the universe. And they said the Bible teaches against it. Now, they don't say that today at all. They have reversed their position, obviously. But once again, if we can bring it down to today, we have the popes now saying that the general theory of evolution is true. They are, of course, wrong on that as well. But be that as it may, the Inquisition obliged Galileo to profess a belief we now know to be false, and they imprisoned him at the Holy Office. The rest of his life, he lost his liberty. Not in a dungeon, but he did lose his liberty under house arrest. He was not allowed to publish any longer. He was not allowed to put out his opinions. He was not allowed to do his scientific research. And when he died, the Pope disallowed a monument for him, and he called his doctrine damnable. Now that's the Pope, the infallible guide, telling us that the sun being the center of the solar system is a damnable doctrine. Now, how in the world can modern Catholics get over this hurdle? Because it does show us the blunders, the huge blunders of the so-called infallible guide. So let's look at a couple modern attempts to exonerate the Roman Catholic Church. Now, the Jesuits have evolved an explanation for the condemnation of Galileo, which reconciles the church's blunder with the doctrine of infallibility of the Pope, because later the Pope came and said, Pope Pius in 1870, the Pope is infallible, he said, and has always been. Well, how's that going to work? How are we going to have the infallibility of the Pope at the same time the Pope had said that the heliocentric view of the universe is damnable doctrine, and Galileo, we're going to put him in house arrest for saying so? How's that going to work? Wow, they have got themselves on the hot seat themselves, don't they? So here's how Catholic answers tries to give us the answer. Catholic.com, Catholic Answers, says this: Galileo was condemned by a commission, not by the Pope himself. And here's the quote from Catholic Answers. Quote, "The Church has never claimed ordinary tribunals, such as the one that condemned Galileo, to be the infallible church or to be infallible church tribunals, and that they have been disciplinary and juridical authority only." That is, only disciplinary authority. "Neither they nor their decisions are infallible. No ecumenical council met concerning Galileo. The Pope was not at the center of the discussions, which were handled by the Holy Office. And when the Holy Office finished its work, Urban No. 8 ratified its verdict, but he did not attempt to engage infallibility." Then it goes on to tell us this. This is from Catholic Answers. 3 conditions must be met for the Pope to exercise the charism, that would be the gift of infallibility. Number 1, he must speak in his official capacity as successor to Peter. So obviously they're saying, "Oh, okay, they were not speaking officially. The Pope was not being official. He's gonna arrest him, but that was unofficial." Number 2, he must speak on a matter of faith or morals. Well, the heliocentric view, they're saying now, well, that was not a matter of faith. We have already seen that was false. They said it violated the Scripture. Number 3, he must solemnly define the doctrine as one that must be held by all the faithful. So those are the conditions for this, for the infallibility to be engaged, as they would put it. So still quoting from the Catholic Answers website, quote, "In Galileo's case, the second and third conditions were not present, and possibly not even the first. Galileo was not condemned for teaching truth, but for being too abrupt about it. He persisted in teaching as a fact something that should have been taught only as theory." All right, let's just take Catholic Answers on here for a moment. All of that is so much poppycock. That is absolutely lie after lie after lie. It is not true. The Pope sat in on the proceedings himself. The entire church said it was against the Scriptures and their proper interpretation, and it was damnable doctrine. Are you telling me, Catholic Answers, that they can do that? They can put people under house arrest, that they can actually burn people at the stake, but those proceedings of a jury are not infallibly guided? That's what they're saying here, that the disciplinary proceedings of the church are not the infallible standard. Why then did the Roman Church persecute for centuries millions of people, put them in house arrest, burn them at the stake, but now they say, well, that we were not infallible in those decisions? I tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that to me, I don't know, I'd be ashamed to write that kind of material. Wouldn't it be better just to come along and say, hey, we were wrong? Well, but they can't say that, because then the infallibility of the church, the infallibility would be gone. This is kind of like Biden's cover-up, the mental decline, everybody coming out there saying, no, he's fine. He was always fine. I've seen him run circles around his staff. No, he doesn't go to bed at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He doesn't get up at 10. No, he does all this work. He's doing great. And the whole time, it was just absolute lie. Here's another thing. The Roman Catholic Church held false doctrine concerning the heliocentric view of the universe, and they acted on it. They condemned Galileo not on scientific discovery, but on false doctrine. To say that the church tribunal was only disciplinary and we never claim infallibility on disciplinary actions misses the point. Many people have been condemned and punished, and now they say, well, that's not the church acting infallibly. Well, why in the world would they therefore have persecuted people and burned them at the stake? I tell you, read the story of William Tyndale. You see how the Roman church burned that man at the stake, burned him alive, for giving the Bible to people. But boy, we're not infallible. We might make mistakes in that. Well, I'll tell you, that is shameful. That is shameful from Catholic Answers. Furthermore, to say this is not a matter of faith and morals, that's even worse. That's even worse to say, well, the heliocentric view that Galileo held was not a matter of faith and morals. That's what they're saying. That's worse. Why? Because I'm asking this question. Doesn't the Roman Catholic Church know her own province? Don't they know what is of faith and what is not of faith? They're basically confessing here they don't even know what is faith and what is not of faith. They thought that the scientific view that the sun is the center was of faith. In Galileo's day, now they say, well, it's not a matter of faith. They don't know what's a matter of faith. They don't know their own province. It is surely a lesser error to decide a question wrongly than to not know what belongs to your province and what does not belong. And to hold his life over his head by the Pope and the holy offices, to deprive him of his liberty under their jurisdiction, and then to say we did not act infallibly in these trials, for the conditions for speaking infallibly were not met, that is a criminal statement. That's exactly what I believe about that. They condemned him in their writings. They condemned him. They put him on the index of condemned writings. They put him on the index as false doctrine. That was under the authority of the Pope. The Pope disallowed his monument. They said it was damnable doctrine. I tell you, ladies and gentlemen, what the case is, the Roman Catholic Church doesn't want you to know the real history of Galileo, because it does show one incident in history here that the Roman Church makes blunders, huge blunders, in doctrine in an area which they supposedly are infallible. They're not infallible. Infallibility does not reside in any man living today. It resides only in the Holy Book. That's it. And it is ours to learn it, to dissect it, to apply it, and to live it. We'll have more in the next podcast.